So today I'm going to be talking about God, guidance, and the new spirituality. This is a continuation of the series that we are doing on a monthly basis. And last month we talked about using guidance as a way to resolve conflicts and to unify people. We have found that the processes that we teach in terms of asking for guidance and getting guidance have given us a lot of gifts. On the one hand, we have to give up our ego attachments to being right or wanting things to come out our own way. On the other hand, what we have gained is more peace of mind, greater sense of empowerment because we feel like there's something behind us and our decisions other than our fear and our egos and our anxieties. And also we have found that by using these processes together as a community, either that could start as a couple of two or to our world, that it's a way that we can see what's there that's blocking our unity, we can work it through, and we can come to decisions together so we're not fighting one another. Of course, we all have to play the game for it to work, don't we? We can't have that kind of unity by using a process that our partners are not using. And so while these tools work, they can only work as well as we do. We have to be willing to let go of our agendas and our fears. And our partners have to be willing to do the same. And we have to be willing to ask for guidance. And so that's where we came to last time. Today, I'd like to talk about what is God that is giving us this guidance, and how does that relate to the new spirituality. We also have now the companionship of our guardian angels. Those of you who know me know that I'm addicted to my dogs. I never said I was perfect. In fact, if I were perfect, I would be useless, because I would have nothing to learn and therefore nothing to teach. If you have taken a look at any of our materials on the new spirituality, I couldn't say that, could I? On the new spirituality, you will notice that there are three major components. One has to do with wellness, wholeness, well-being, oneness on the personal level of ourselves, our mind, body, spirit, being integrated, being whole, being at one with ourselves, not sacrificing one part of us for another, which most of us do. Most of us pick something. I have tended to sacrifice my body to my spirituality. Some people sacrifice their minds. Some people sacrifice their spirits for material things. Some of us sacrifice all three. And what we know is we are not well unless we are whole and integrated. Because we are one. We are one being. I don't care how spiritual you are. If you're hungry and eating a lot of sugar, you're going to have jangled nerves. And that's going to make you more reactive. And I don't care how healthy you are. If you don't feed your mind and allow yourself to think the thoughts that are real for you, and instead of just surrendering to the collective prejudices, you're not going to be well, because you're going to do things that are foolish, that are really against you. And if you don't feed your spirit, there's nothing to sustain you. When times get rough, which seems to be every moment, as far as I can tell. And the second component of the new spirituality is living in oneness consciousness, meaning that not only are we at one with ourselves, but we are trying to understand our oneness with everyone. And we need to learn how to do that because it doesn't come naturally, because we are all ego-based, and because our world doesn't teach it. So if it doesn't come naturally and it isn't taught, how are we going to know? And so we have many programs here at the Stream that teach oneness consciousness in a very clear and specific way. And we're talking about doing it concretely, not in theory. It's not enough for us to be able to go into moments of meditation where we feel so at peace if we can't follow through in our moment-to-moment living. And if we don't have the tools to do it, how can we? It just becomes a way of oppressing ourselves because we fall short of our goal. In fact, most of the time, we don't even notice how fragmented we are from one another and how adversarial we are and how much we are caught up in the me, me, me. But there it is. I mean, all we have to do is look at the world. We may not see it that easily in ourselves, but do we have any trouble seeing it in other people? Those selfish people. The boss thinks that the workers are unreasonable, and the workers think the boss is a tyrant and selfish. And sadly enough, we see that lack of oneness consciousness in so much of our spirituality in our world. Sects of the same religion killing each other. Let's have the same religion. Let's not even talk about different ones. You know, we say we have one God, but evidently we don't believe that. Which leads me to the third component, which is what I'm going to be focusing on more today in my talk, which is we need a different theology, a different vision of what God is, or the divine. We need a theology that is about evolution rather than perfection. Where we are constantly learning and where we feel connected, deeply connected to that divinity. And we can't do that in a dualistic universe. So if you notice, what I'm saying is that it's all about oneness. Oneness within ourselves, oneness with one another, and oneness with the divine. Now, many of us preach that idea, that we are one with God, or whatever we call that higher consciousness or the divine energy. But we don't really mean it. Because most of us still are looking to be saved by some perfect, omnipotent, omniscient entity that is somehow going to rescue us from the conditions of life and the realities of being here. And what is the price of that? And what does that have to do with guidance? Well, who are we looking for divine guidance to? No, I've been teaching for months now about being divinely guided. But by what? The light bulb the old man in the sky, the fairies. By whom? By what? What are we really talking about? I hate when people ask me, what do you mean by God? Because that assumes that I actually have an answer. But, or even the divine, I try to sort of slough it around by saying, well, the divine, the infinite, you know. Because I know it's not the old man in the sky, but what is it? And I've been playing around with this question for over 30 years. While I've been teaching that we should be divinely guided, I sit there and think, what do I mean? What is God? And I hope nobody asks me today. But I would like to venture where angels fear to tread today, because I'd like to talk more about God so we can start grounding what we mean by guidance. So we can continue to work towards leading a guided life as individuals and as a collective, which we've already agreed we all need, so that we can come into harmony and we can start healing ourselves and our world. And I'm going to give you a little history, which is that in the early 80s, when I had my psychic and spiritual awakenings, I had a conversation with God, who came to me as the white light, because then I would fall over it and I'd recognize I was talking to God, whereas if God came to me as an ant, I probably wouldn't notice. And God said, and I know you've heard this a million times from me, but some of you haven't heard it at all, so I'm going to tell you. God said that, and remember, Beth, I am changing. And I was appalled, because I thought God created the heavens and the earth in His own image, and that was it. And then He was busily up there telling me what to do in order to make my life better. Even if what I wanted was diametrically opposed to your needs. You were obviously wrong, because God was going to be on my side. And so I was very, very confronted by the idea that God was changing, because it really flew in the face of God's being perfect, whole, static. It. And that only the world changed. We changed. The sands changed. The weather changed. But God, that's scary. I mean, isn't there anything I can hold on to? And what God said to me was, Beth, are you part of me? And of course I said yes, because every good spiritual girl knows that I am part of God, right? And He said, and am I you? And I said, well, of course, you know, we all know this, right? So if I am you and you are me and I am changing, and you are changing, how could I not be changing? Well, that was just too darn logical. I didn't know what to do with that. And in fact, in truth, my old spirituality had no common sense. There was no common sense to it. I couldn't get it. I would sit there and I would say, oh, I love God. God is so wonderful. And I would look around and people are killing each other and maiming each other and molesting each other and destroying each other emotionally and spiritually, and I'd say, oh, but God is good. You know, our problem is we're not godlike. You know. And from there, it went downhill, because I then was looking at this and allowing myself to be honest with myself and say to myself, is there anything about this world that tells me that God is perfect? I mean, who would create such a universe? That was my vision of this. And then I would hear, well, you know, this is a school. And I said, well, what parent would create a school like this, where children have are burned by cigarettes by their parents? I mean, would you send your child to a school where they did that? So, come on, God. You know, what's this about? And yet I know that when I ask for divine guidance and we go and we ask the question, which I've taught you up to this point, which is what is for the highest good of all, including me, and we ask for divine guidance, we get the most amazing help. So I was like, it doesn't compute, does it? I often ask God, why me? Why did I become a spiritual teacher when I was an atheist the day before? I mean, that's the way it was. I was an atheist. I was a social activist. I was totally there, no spirituality, no God, nothing. But I had a meltdown because I became a nut, because I thought that I was in charge of the world and I had to fix everything and I had to do everything, and I felt alone. And I couldn't stand that either. So then I had to adopt a spiritual attitude of, you'll never walk alone, in order to make it through the day, and in order to stop thinking that I was God. So I had to have somebody above me, right? So here I am, I desperately emotionally need to have somebody above me to give me guidance and to give me the feeling that, okay, it's all right, it's really all right, Beth. And at the same time I looked at it and I said, are you nuts? And I just let it all hang out, all of my doubts, all my upset, all my anger at God for this miserable existence that God created when He created the heavens and the earth. And of course, when God came to me and said, I am changing, that shook me up, but gave me the opening to have a new relationship with God. That I would stop thinking of God as above me, as different from me. And yet at the same time, I knew that God and I were different, and that confused me too. I mean, in the sense that I asked for divine guidance because I need it. I need a higher level of consciousness than I'm capable of. So I hadn't quite resolved it yet. And then I heard coming out of my mouth, because that's the way I learn most of what I learned, because God told me not to study anything and not to read anything, but to be a blank slate for God to write on, whatever God was. And so I would just go empty, and things would come out of my mouth, and I would start talking about God and the fragmentation of consciousness and the healing of God. And the words were, God is the totality of all being. So I said, okay, now I've got the answer. God is the totality. So I look around and I say, oh my God, is that any better? What does that mean? What does that mean? Where is that divine feeling when you look at the garbage dump and the rats and our own anger, and what's that all about? And I was taught by whatever this God was, through the books that I was writing and through the things that I was saying, the things would start coming out of my mouth that would help me to understand that, as we call it, the myth of creation, in the beginning there was the oneness, but it fragmented because God was bored, because God had no experience, because you have no experience unless you have contrast. And I liked that myth. It really helped. And that in the process, all the fragments forgot that they were all aspects of God. But then I see people going off the deep end and saying, well, obviously, I'm God. You must have met people like this. I've been meeting them for 30 years. I am God. And you look at them and say, I hope not. So we're trying to claim our godliness, and then that becomes, our egos grab onto that, and suddenly I am God. So if I'm not God, and the totality is a mess, and God isn't really above me, and God is changing, I mean, who am I asking for divine guidance from? Well, how do you like this for an explanation? Let's try this one on. In the Healing of God book, Sacred Union, the Healing of God, which is a book that I wrote I don't know, 13 years ago or so. It talks about the fragments forgot that we were one. Only feel our fragmentation, which is very understandable. I am a sentient being. If somebody drops a book on my foot, I am going to hurt. If somebody drops a book on your foot, I'm going to have sympathy, maybe empathy, but my toe will not break. Your toe breaks, but mine. So obviously, we're separate, right? At the same time, we're one. Isn't that what every spiritual teacher says? And don't we even have evidence of that? Which is that we think each other's thoughts, we have each other's feelings, we feel things about each other, we see our oneness, we see how alike we are. It's like, woo, aren't we all made of atoms? Don't we have the same emotions, really? In different degrees. And so what I learned was, yes, we are individuals in the context of oneness, like I am a cell in the body of the whole, which is God. I said, oh, I like that. Now I know who I am. God is the body, and I am the cell. Cool. We all have the same DNA. You can find any cell anywhere. It's going to have this, doesn't it? Don't all the cells have the same DNA? Somebody should say yes. Yes, okay. Thank you. I always need a fact checker. So, okay. So it's really pretty remarkable, isn't it? That we all have the same DNA. And if you look at it, we're all electrons and positrons and neutrons. Underneath it all, we really are made of the same stuff. And we know that we really are connected. And we know that consciousness creates a field. Because if that were not true, that consciousness creates a field, we wouldn't do so many stupid things. Because there are things that I would never do, but when I'm with a group that's doing it, I just go, oh yeah, I'm doing it. Like need designer jeans when there isn't enough food on the table, or go lynch a poor guy because he happens to be the wrong color, or some other stupid thing, or have the courage to go out there and demonstrate when the horses are coming to bonk you on the head. Because we are so connected, we are caught up in the energy of the field. So we know all of that is true. And we know that from our own experience. This has to be integrated into our common sense experience of what is God. But does that mean that God is the lynch mob? Because it is that collective consciousness, because it is that totality. But if we come back to the idea that consciousness fragmented and that each one of us is a fragment of the whole, then we realize something else which is common sense, which is the more wisdom we have, the better decisions we're going to make. And wisdom comes from perspective. And I talk about this in Living with Reality, another book of mine. Wisdom comes from the ability to see more. Let's talk very common sense, right? Do you let the child run the family? Unfortunately, too often. But you don't want the infant to really be running the family because they have no perspective. You see the child is going to run into the street. You as the adult know from experience that if you run into the street, you may get hit by a car. That child has not had that experience yet. It does not have the perspective to regulate its behavior. Now, if it gets hit a few times, it might learn. What we hope is that we can share with one another so we don't all have to have the terrible experiences. We want to believe that some of us are able to hear our elders who say, don't start shooting heroin, you'll be very sorry. But no, many of us have to have that experience ourselves. Don't try to find a husband in a bar when you're drunk. But no. If you see that so-and-so is completely out of control, don't throw fuel on the fire. But no. If you keep giving in to the bully, they'll keep bullying you. But no. We're always reinventing the wheel, aren't we? But we're hoping hoping that we can come together and learn something, and each one of us can bring in a piece of the story, and we can begin to develop perspective. Because perspective, we think of it as being vertical. I am high, and I look down, which is true. The eagle has a bigger perspective than the ant. But as I say in Living with Reality, the ant has a perspective that the eagle does not, because the ant can see things on the ground. But supposing we could integrate the consciousness and the awareness of the eagle and the ant, and everything in between, we would have a lot of wisdom, wouldn't we? So it's not that God is above us, and it's not that God is inside us. It is that we are an aspect of the larger perspective that is God. That God, what we call God, because after all, God is a word that we use, or this, this is just a word, right? But what we mean is, Jesus, let's get out of our narrow, self-centered, limited perspective and get some sense about what's going to work. Let's stop destroying our planet, our ecosystem, and change the climate and then moan about how bad the weather is. So thinking about this on a higher level, what we realize is that we're looking for integration, higher and higher levels of integration, or broader and broader levels of integration. So it is true that God is the totality, but God is not the totality absent integration. The totality absent integration is what we see. What we are looking for guidance is some ability somewhere, somehow, to integrate all consciousness so that we can see behind us, ahead of us, above us, and below us, so we can be guided by a consciousness greater than our own. And that is what I mean as God. So when I say that I love to be in the divine energy, what I mean is I love to be in the energy of integration, where I feel wholeness, where I actually feel wholeness. Now let's come back to the changing conversation, because in this universe there is constant evolution. There is constant integration. If you look at our world, in fact, on a very material and physical plane, you can see over the last 100 years how much more integrated we are. I mean, it starts with the Vikings, or Christopher Columbus, or some dude, who gets this idea that I gotta go. I want to see what's out there. Excuse me, I just realized. Anyway, what can I say? I'm Jewish. Born Jewish. So some dude wants to go out there and explore the world, and because there's more to the world than where I am in this moment. And I discover that the globe is big. And there are more of us. And it continued with the telegraph and the steam engine and the telephone and the computer and so on and so on. So we know that our technology has been really moving us toward integration. We now get it because we are so destructive that we have had to recognize that what we do in the Amazon impacts our air. Of course, it hasn't stopped us, but we at least get it. That If I throw my shit into the ocean and so do you, eventually the fish are going to have plastic balls in their guts and going to kill them, or there's going to be toxicity. And so we're getting it. I cannot act individually. Or I should say that I shouldn't act individually, because I do act individually, because I need to be thinking about the impact and the implications on the whole of everything I do, because everything that happens in the whole is impacting me. And you look at people and you look at the weather, and people who used to say there is no global warming are beginning to panic. And that maybe it was okay to be abusive to animals, but gee, if I'm going to also eat them, that's going to affect me, and so on and so on and so on. Our consciousness is becoming more integrated. Our awareness is expanding. But it's still very narrow for many reasons. We couldn't live long enough in these bodies to learn everything. If we did, we couldn't integrate that knowledge. Our brains are not that terrific. And even our computers can't put it all together. It's just too much information. And we wouldn't even know what to do with it. We'd be on overload, which is pretty much what's happening now. And we can't take it all in, so we tend to fixate on some part of the whole. So, for example, our news media do tend to fixate on the most sensational items, and we consider that information. So what is the source of our information? And if we have friends, relatives, experiences, and they are going to give us information, just like we want the parent to tell us, if you put your hand on the stove, you will burn it. They are sometimes reliable sources of information. But my mother told me when I was a little girl, since I mentioned that I grew up Jewish, that you can't trust the Goyim, which is the Gentiles, because she had an experience with a little girl when she lived in New Jersey, 90 years ago. My mother is almost 99. And she had this terrible experience, and she's trying to communicate that to me. And she's telling me you can't trust the Goyim. And of course, that we've just had World War II, and Hitler is just, and the Nazis have just, killed 6 million Jews. So I could get that from her. So where am I getting my information from that I am integrating? So, this is getting complicated, isn't it? I can't integrate it all. What's the source? Are my own perceptions better? Or are they just equally narrow? Let's say I grow up in New York City, where it seems like everybody is Jewish, even if you're not. And so I get the idea that there is no anti-Semitism. And then I go to Massachusetts and I'm horrified because, oh my God, there is. But see, I grew up with the feeling that there wasn't. Every one of us is so limited by our ability to experience, to learn, to integrate by what we are taught. Then we have the media. I mean, there are images, when you look back on old movies, there are times when they're laughable. We think we're so sophisticated. Of course, we are equally laughable, but we don't see that. Oh my God. So who are we going to ask? Where is wisdom coming from? How am I supposed to know whether we should paint this wall blue or green? Do I know who's going to be here, how it's going to impact them, what needs to shift in my own consciousness? I will always go for that which makes me the most comfortable. Right? Is that always the wisest choice? The thing that is most comfortable to me? It may be that the most uncomfortable is the wisest choice, because it is calling me to something higher, because it will support my evolution. So, here we go. I myself cannot be God. I don't care how many times I say it. I'm God, I'm God, I'm God. I know I'm not. I am also not God. So I have to look to an integrated consciousness. And what is that and where is that? That even my ability to connect to the level of integration depends on my capacity. I need the capacity to connect to a higher level of integration or a broader level of integration of consciousness. Because if I'm stuck in the I hate you, I hate you, I hate you mode, I'm not available to a larger perspective. When I am being driven by my own emotions, I am not available to greater wisdom. If I am defending myself, I'm not capable of accessing that. This is getting complicated. It sounded so easy, didn't it? Let's just connect to the greatest level of integration we can. That is God. And we'll be guided. Well, that's why we've been doing this program of how do you do that. But that's what we're looking for. And back to evolution, as we can see, integration is the direction of evolution. Integration of consciousness. More awareness, broader awareness. What is evolution? It's the process of becoming, which is what we talk about in Living with Reality. It is the never-ending process of evolving, of changing, of transforming, and we hope in some positive direction. So I've given it the spin, that we are evolving to integration. So we started with the oneness, and we fragmented into individual consciousness. And I'm not going to go into details on that now, but you can read about it in The Healing of God or Living with Reality. And as we evolve, we become more and more integrated because we see that. Common sense. What differentiates the adult from the child, if the adult has any degree of maturity, is integration of awareness. We can see a little bit more of what might happen. Of course, simultaneously, we are so skewed by our own experience. That's a good thing and a bad thing. We start integrating the fragments of consciousness and think we know something. So one of the things that differentiates the child is the child knows they don't know, or they occasionally admit that they don't know, and are open to learning. And so we need to integrate the wisdom of the child, which says, I don't know, which the wisdom of the adult that says, let's look at the big picture, and call upon ourselves to go to the greatest level of integration of consciousness that we can access, and ask for guidance. Humbly ask for guidance. Not because God is above us, but because what we refer to of God, as God is more integrated. And God itself is in the process of evolution. And we can allow for a love of God when we don't have to make ourselves stupid by pretending that God is perfect and pretending that everything is perfect. We can say God is evolving, which means that God itself is moving to higher levels of integration. And I want to be able to go with that. I want to connect to that. I want wisdom. I want the peace that I can feel above the clouds and above the rain, where I'm not completely dominated by my emotions. Ugh. I love it. I can actually have a God that I can love and relate to, and that I'm taking off the hook. You don't have to rescue me, but for God's sake, please give me a clue as to what to do. for the highest good of all, and that would actually promote the evolution that we're all going through. And in a way, it's all simple. All consciousness, our universe, everything is evolving towards an unknown destination because we don't have the capacity to see where it's all going. And that evolution is about greater and greater integration, that we will become more whole. And so when we go back to the 3 points about the 3 components of the new spirituality, we're back to body, mind, spirit integration started us off. That seems so simple. We have to be well mentally, emotionally, physically in order to be well enough to be in oneness with each other. Because scared people do not act in a highest good kind of a way. You know, when we're scared and when we're traumatized and we're defensive, we can't do that. So we need that well-being. We need that integration on the personal level in order to come together. And that is all part of the shift in our relationship with the divine, where we're no longer children asking to be saved, but partners and in the process of evolution. And that my evolution and my transformations are part of God transforming. And I'm no longer a child, but neither am I God. As an individual, I am an aspect of God. It's just like that cell in your body is not the body, but it contains the entire potential of the body within it. And we in our egos, we just don't know what to do. You know, because we feel like so much like we are God or we are nothing. We kind of flip-flop between those two. I'm going to be saying a lot more about God and evolution in the future. But if we could but remember that it's all about evolution and transformation, then when we ask for guidance, we will know that what we're asking for is what is going to support evolution. Our evolution and the evolution of the whole, including the evolution of God. That's what I'm asking for. We typically go for guidance for what will work for me, what will make me more comfortable, how will I solve this problem. We don't have in our consciousness that we're asking what will help me transform, what will help the whole transform, what will support God transforming. But that's what we're really asking for. And then we can relax. Because then we don't have to judge things by their results, because we don't even know what those results are half the time. And those of us who've lived long enough to have seen transformation and evolution over long periods of time know that we need to stop reacting from the fragmented consciousness of the moment and hang on to the faith that evolution is possible. And sometimes things die in the process. And that's part of evolution too. I've often wondered why we think it's so important to live a very long time, because the world would be so cluttered with old human beings, I can't see the point. And myself, coming into my older age, not old age yet, but older age, rapidly creeping on to 70, just a year and a half to go. It's like, no, I don't want to clutter the planet. You know, trees die. I hate that. Plants die. Everything dies. It's all part of growth, transformation, and evolution. I'd like to share one more thing before I close. I did not grow up with a great deal of awareness on the visual level. I've always been audio. I hear things, music. I hear what people say, and I'm in my head a lot. But the visual has not been my strength. I don't notice things. I remember when my former husband came home and said, well, do you notice anything? And I said, no, and he had shaved his mustache. And and was worse than that. I had been married to him for several years, and I didn't remember that his eyes were blue. But anyway, I mean, I'm just trying to tell you I'm visually challenged. But so when I go out, we all have our weaknesses, right? That's why we need each other. So when I go out in nature, I always think that this is like a picture, like a photograph, and it's going to be the same way the next day. And I had to live in nature, which we do. We have this beautiful sanctuary in nature, and I sincerely hope that many of you find your way to Bonsall, to North County, San Diego, to see our sanctuary. But what you find is that it's never the same, from one day to the next. And I'm always appalled, because I get used to it being a certain way, and then suddenly these other plants are growing, and if I even notice it, it may take me a year or two before I notice that things have happened. And then a tree dies. I'm completely crushed. But I notice that about nature. And what does that tell us? It's always evolving, and it will never be the same. And if we could make peace with that, peace with the fact that our bodies are changing every day, that our world is changing, and that we can't control it, and don't have to, but have faith that somehow there is a movement towards something, that we're evolving towards something. That's faith in God. I like it. Do you?
Yeah.
So let's bring that attitude into our asking for guidance, that we're looking to support evolution, not to keep things the way they are or make them the way we want them to be, but that we are part of something much bigger than ourselves, that we are integral to God because we are the cells in God's body, and that God is integral to us. And that the more and more we achieve well-being as individuals and can be more and more neutral and calm, and the more and more we open our hearts, the more we will be guided to support that evolution, and we will feel more and more oneness with the divine. Thank you.